John had always loved living in his luxury neighborhood. The streets were wide, the houses were beautiful, and every home had its own unique style. But what John loved the most was his pride and joy, his private luxury helicopter. It was not just a machine, it was a dream he had worked hard for. Shiny, red, and perfectly maintained, it sat in his backyard helipad, ready for him to fly anywhere at a moment's notice. Life seemed perfect, but little did John know, his peaceful life was about to take a dramatic turn. The problem came from a person he never expected, Karen, his new neighbor. From the moment she moved in, Karen had been a constant source of trouble. She was loud, opinionated, and never missed a chance to complain about anything. Whether it was the way John trimmed his grass or the sound of birds chirping near her house, Karen always found something wrong. At first, John tried to be polite. He smiled, waved, and even tried small talks, thinking that maybe she was just stressed from moving. But Karen's complaints quickly grew worse. She started criticizing the paint color of his house, the type of flowers in his garden, and even the fact that he sometimes parked his car slightly outside his driveway. John thought, maybe I just have a strict neighbor. That's normal. But soon, it became clear that Karen wasn't just strict, she was obsessed with controlling everything around her. One sunny morning, John woke up to the sound of loud knocking on his front door. It was Karen, holding a notebook and looking very serious. "John," she said, frowning, "you need to fix your helicopter immediately. It's too noisy, and it disturbs my peace." John blinked, confused. "Karen, it's parked in my backyard. It's not even running." "That's not the point," she replied sharply. "It's the thought of it. I can't sleep knowing that thing is right there." John tried not to laugh. The thought of a helicopter parked quietly being a problem? But he didn't want to make things worse. "Okay, Karen. I'll try to be more careful," he said, hoping that would end the conversation. But it didn't. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, John noticed that Karen's behavior was becoming more intense. She started taking pictures of his property, writing notes about violations, and even talking to other neighbors to get them to complain about him. John was shocked. He had always followed the neighborhood rules, paid his HOA fees on time, and respected everyone's space. Yet Karen seemed determined to make his life difficult. John began to feel anxious every time he stepped outside. He loved his helicopter, but now just looking at it made him nervous. What if Karen finds a new reason to complain? He thought. He wished things could go back to normal, but he knew deep down that Karen was not the type of neighbor to leave anyone alone. One evening, John decided to take his helicopter out for a short flight. The sky was clear, and the sunset painted everything in gold. Flying always made him feel free, away from stress, away from Karen's constant complaints. For those few minutes in the air, he felt alive, happy, and peaceful. But when he returned home, he felt a strange tension in the air. The quiet streets felt heavy, almost like the calm before a storm. John parked his helicopter and walked toward his house, noticing nothing unusual until he got closer to the backyard. His heart stopped. The helicopter was different. Something was wrong. The bright red paint had scratches, the rotor blades were slightly bent, and there were marks all over the body. John couldn't believe his eyes. He slowly circled the helicopter, trying to understand what had happened. It didn't look like an accident, it looked deliberate. Then he heard the sound of heels clicking on the concrete. Karen was standing at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, with a smug look on her face. "I told you, John," she said, her voice cold. "You need to learn a lesson. That helicopter of yours is too loud, too flashy, and frankly, too annoying. Maybe now you understand what I mean." John's mouth went dry. You did this?" he asked, staring at the damage. Karen shrugged, almost casually. "Maybe. I just wanted to teach you a lesson about respecting your neighbors. You have to think about everyone, not just yourself." John felt a mix of anger and disbelief. He had spent years working hard for that helicopter. It was not just an object, it was his dream, his freedom. And now, Karen had destroyed it, just to prove a point. He wanted to yell, to confront her, but he also knew that losing his temper would probably make things worse. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "Karen, this isn't okay. You can't just damage someone's property because you think they're bothering you." Karen smiled, almost mockingly. "We'll see what the HOA thinks about it," she said, turning on her heels and walking back toward her house. John stood there, staring at the helicopter. His mind raced. He knew this was just the beginning. Karen had crossed a line, and he had no idea what she would do next. But one thing was certain, he couldn't let this go. Something had to be done, or Karen would keep pushing, and it might get even worse. For the first time in his life, John felt truly challenged by a neighbor. He had dealt with minor annoyances before, but nothing like this. Karen was not just a complainer, she was dangerous when provoked. And John realized that handling this situation carefully would take patience, strategy, and perhaps even some help from the HOA. That night, John sat on his porch, looking at the damaged helicopter under the dim light. He knew he had to act fast, but he also needed to be smart. Karen had underestimated him, and that was her biggest mistake. Little did he know, the story was about to get much more intense. Karen didn't just stop at the helicopter. She had a plan, and John was about to be caught in a whirlwind of chaos, conflict, and unexpected twists. This was not just a story about a helicopter, it was a story about Karen, the neighbor who went too far, and the lesson she never expected John to fight back. And so, the stage was set. The calm, luxurious neighborhood would soon become a battlefield of wits, rules, and revenge. And the first move had already been made. Karen had destroyed the helicopter to teach a lesson. But in the end, would she really be the one teaching, or would John find a way to turn the tables? The morning after the helicopter incident, John woke up with a heavy heart. The sun was shining, the neighborhood looked peaceful, but for him, everything felt different. Walking outside, he kept glancing at the damaged helicopter. It wasn't just scratched metal anymore, it was a symbol of Karen's audacity. How could someone go this far just to make a point? He thought about confronting her, but he also knew it could backfire. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was bold, cunning, and fearless. She had a way of twisting situations, making it seem like she was always right. But John had to do something. He couldn't let her get away with destroying his property. John decided to start small. He took out his phone and documented the damage, close-up photos of scratches, bent rotor blades, and even footprints near the helipad. Then, he wrote down everything that had happened over the past few weeks, the complaints, the notes, and now this destruction. He knew this would be important if he went to the HOA or even the police. But while he was busy planning his next step, Karen appeared. She wasn't at the fence or on her porch like yesterday. No, this time, she walked straight toward him, holding a cup of coffee, smiling like nothing had happened. "Good morning, John," she said cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." John clenched his jaw. "Morning, Karen," he said coldly. "We need to talk about yesterday." Karen laughed softly. "Talk? Oh, I think we've already talked enough. I just hope you learned your lesson." John's patience snapped. "Karen! This isn't a lesson. This is vandalism. You damaged my helicopter." Karen tilted her head. "Vandalism? Really? I didn't touch it. Maybe the wind was too strong. Or maybe it's karma." John stared at her in disbelief. "Karma? She thinks this is funny." "You're lying," he shouted. "I saw you there. Don't act innocent." Karen's smile didn't falter. "Oh, John, you always overreact. I'm just trying to make the neighborhood peaceful. Maybe you need to think more about others." John realized that arguing with her directly would be useless. Karen thrived on conflict, and she had a way of twisting every situation. He needed a plan, but more importantly, he needed evidence, and fast. Over the next few days, Karen's behavior escalated. She started leaving notes at his door, each one more ridiculous than the last. "Stop parking your car in the sun, it offends me. Trim your grass shorter, it blocks my view. Your mailbox is too shiny, it blinds me in the morning." John laughed nervously the first few times, thinking maybe she was just eccentric. But then he realized she was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could go. And he knew that if he didn't respond carefully, things would only get worse. One afternoon, John was working on repairing his helicopter when he noticed Karen watching from her window. She waved at him cheerfully, as if nothing had happened, but John could feel her eyes burning into him. There was something dangerous in that look, a mix of smugness and challenge. He shook his head. This isn't just about the helicopter anymore, he thought. It's about power. Karen wants to control me, control the neighborhood. And I won't let her. John decided to take a bold step. He emailed the HOA, carefully detailing everything, Karen's constant complaints, her notes, and the helicopter incident. He attached all the photos he had taken. He wanted the HOA to see the truth, to understand that this wasn't just neighborly tension, this was harassment. The reply didn't come immediately. And that uncertainty was the worst part. Every time he saw Karen outside, John felt like he was walking on a tightrope. She smiled, waved, and sometimes muttered something under her breath, making it clear that she was watching, waiting, and planning her next move. Then came the turning point. One evening, John saw Karen in the backyard again. This time, she was examining the helicopter closely, almost obsessively. She bent down, tapped the rotor blades, and whispered something that John couldn't hear. His heart pounded. Is she planning something else? John knew he had to stay calm, but his anger simmered beneath the surface. Karen had crossed every line possible. She had destroyed his property, invaded his space, and tried to make him feel small. And now, it was clear that she wasn't finished. That night, John couldn't sleep. He replayed every moment in his mind, thinking about Karen's words, her actions, and her smug smile. He realized that dealing with her wasn't just about confrontation, it was about strategy. He needed to be smarter than her, faster than her, and most importantly, he needed to protect what was his. Little did he know, Karen had already set her next plan into motion. And whatever she was planning, it was going to escalate the conflict to a level John had never expected. By the time the sun rose the next day, John had made a decision. He wasn't going to back down. He would fight this, not with anger or threats, but with careful steps, evidence, and the support of the HOA. But Karen? She was unpredictable. Dangerous. And she had no idea that John was about to turn the tables in ways she could never imagine. The stage was no longer just a helicopter in a backyard. The real battle was about to begin, a battle of wits, patience, and survival in the quiet, luxurious neighborhood. And Karen was about to discover that some neighbors don't back down. The morning sun glinted off the neighborhood streets, but John didn't notice. His mind was elsewhere, racing. For days, he had been cautious, carefully documenting everything Karen did, preparing to go to the HOA. But deep down, he felt a creeping unease. Something about Karen felt dangerous. He decided to check on the helicopter first thing. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe instinct, but John had a feeling. As he stepped into the backyard, his stomach dropped. The helicopter was worse. Scratches had multiplied, the rotor blades were bent even more, and there were dents that hadn't been there yesterday. But this time, it was different. The damage didn't look like a small act of vandalism, it looked personal, deliberate, and almost vindictive. John froze, heart pounding. There, at the edge of the yard, Karen stood, holding a small toolbox. She looked calm, casual, almost innocent. But John knew better. Karen, he shouted. What did you do this time? Karen didn't respond immediately. She took a slow step closer, glancing at the helicopter with what looked like pride. I told you, John, she said softly, almost taunting. You need to understand that sometimes, people have to learn lessons the hard way. This is your lesson. John's hands clenched into fists. This isn't a lesson. This is destruction. My helicopter is my life, my dream. Karen shrugged. Dreams can be dangerous. Maybe if it weren't so flashy, I wouldn't have had to teach you. John felt his blood boil. He wanted to run, to scream, to stop her, but he realized something terrifying. Karen didn't just want to damage his property. She wanted to humiliate him, make him feel powerless, and push him to the edge. In a split second, Karen moved closer, tapping the rotor blade with the toolbox. John could see the gleam of metal and the way her eyes sparkled with mischief. "See? You can't even protect your own toys," she said, her voice almost playful. John stepped forward, finally snapping. "Stop. You've gone too far." Karen laughed, a high, chilling laugh. "Too far? This is just the beginning. Maybe next time, the HOA won't save you." Her words sent a chill down John's spine. He realized that confronting her alone was dangerous. Karen wasn't just a difficult neighbor anymore. She was unpredictable, and she didn't care about rules or consequences. But before John could react further, something unexpected happened. Across the street, one of the HOA members, Mr. Thompson, had seen the commotion. He was waving his arms, shouting, and within moments, a few neighbors gathered, staring at the scene with wide eyes. Karen's confident smirk faltered slightly. "Oh, so the neighborhood is watching now," she muttered, almost under her breath. But instead of stopping, she acted even bolder, pointing at John. "See? He doesn't even care about anyone but himself. I'm just helping." John took a deep breath, realizing he had an advantage. The eyes of the neighborhood were on Karen, the very thing she hated most, witnesses. And he knew that if he stayed calm, he could finally turn the situation around. He raised his hands slowly, speaking clearly so everyone could hear. "Neighbors, this isn't just a complaint. This is destruction of property. My helicopter, my dream, has been damaged intentionally. Karen, you need to stop now." Murmurs spread through the crowd. People exchanged looks, some shaking their heads, others whispering. Karen's face hardened. She was used to controlling situations when no one was watching, but now the entire neighborhood was witnessing her actions. John didn't wait for her response. He called the HOA directly, reporting the incident and showing the photos he had taken over the past week. Within minutes, the HOA president, Mr. Lewis, arrived with 2 security guards. Karen tried to argue, tried to claim it was an accident, but the evidence was too strong. The witnesses, the photos, and John's calm but firm explanation left her flustered. For the first time, Karen's confidence faltered. John felt a surge of relief, but he also knew this wasn't over. Karen had crossed a line, yes, but she was clever, manipulative, and she had friends who might back her up. The helicopter incident was just the start of a bigger war, one that could involve the HOA, the law, and perhaps even the police. As Karen was escorted inside her house by the HOA security, she threw a final glance at John, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and calculation. "This isn't over," she whispered. John watched her retreat, the adrenaline slowly fading. His helicopter was damaged, his patience tested, but for the first time in days, he felt a small victory. Karen had made a mistake underestimating John and the power of witnesses. He walked slowly to the helicopter, examining the damage again. It was bad, but reparable. More importantly, he realized something crucial. Karen could try to intimidate him all she wanted, but now he had the evidence, the neighborhood, and the law on his side. And deep down, John knew one thing: the battle was far from over. Karen had started this war, but John was ready. And the next time she made a move, she wouldn't just face him, she would face the consequences she never expected. The helicopter was scratched, bent, and scarred. But the real damage was already done. The calm of the neighborhood had shattered. And the story between John and Karen was only getting started. The day after the helicopter incident, John woke to a strange silence. The neighborhood felt quiet, almost too quiet. Usually, birds chirped, sprinklers ran, and neighbors went about their routines. But today, everything seemed on edge. John knew why Karen had retreated, but her presence lingered like a shadow over the block. He stepped outside and noticed something he hadn't expected. Several HOA officials, including Mr. Lewis, the president, were walking down the street. They weren't alone, a few neighbors followed, curious eyes watching every step. John's heart pounded. This was it, the HOA meeting that could determine everything. Karen appeared at her door, dressed neatly, her smile sharp and calculated. She waved at the group, but John could see the tension in her posture. For weeks, she had manipulated the rules in her favor, making small complaints and creating chaos. But now, with the damage to the helicopter, the situation had escalated. And she knew she couldn't control the narrative anymore. The HOA meeting began in the small clubhouse at the end of the street. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and tension filled the air. John sat quietly, keeping his evidence close, photos, notes, and even video clips of Karen near the helicopter. He didn't want to speak first, he wanted to let the drama unfold. Karen, naturally, spoke first. She painted a story of John being careless, loud, and disrespectful, twisting small incidents into big problems. He doesn't consider anyone in the neighborhood, she claimed, voice calm but sharp. This helicopter of his disturbs the peace. I only wanted to protect our community. The HOA members listened, some nodding politely. But John could sense the shift. Karen's story was full of exaggeration and emotion, but the officials were trained to look at facts. And the facts, the photos, the witnesses, the documentation were on John's side. When it was John's turn, he stood, his voice steady but firm. Karen has been harassing me for weeks. She has left notes, taken pictures, and even damaged my helicopter. This isn't about noise or peace, this is about destruction and intimidation. I have evidence, and witnesses saw her at the scene. A hush fell over the room. The neighbors murmured, and even some of Karen's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. John calmly presented his photos, video clips, and notes. Each piece of evidence told the story clearly. Karen had gone too far. Mr. Lewis leaned back, rubbing his chin. This is serious, he said. We need to consider both the rules of the HOA and the safety of the neighborhood. He paused, looking directly at Karen. Deliberately damaging property is not acceptable. This situation may require further action, including contacting the authorities. Karen's face flushed, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. Her usual confidence faltered. She opened her mouth to argue but found herself interrupted by a neighbor, Mrs. Patel, a quiet woman who rarely spoke. I've seen what's been happening, Mrs. Patel said. Karen complains about everything, but this time it's obvious she went too far. We all saw her at the helicopter. The room shifted again. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing that the witnesses she relied on to back her stories were now siding against her. John felt a strange mix of relief and tension. He had won a small victory, but he also knew Karen was unpredictable. She wasn't someone who would quietly accept defeat. And he suspected she already had another plan brewing. After hours of discussion, the HOA reached a preliminary decision. Karen would have to pay for part of the helicopter damage, attend a mediation session with John, and her future complaints would be closely monitored. It wasn't the final end, but it was a clear message: Karen couldn't cross the line without consequences. As John left the clubhouse, he felt a sense of cautious triumph. The helicopter was safe, at least for now. But the tension lingered. Karen didn't retreat quietly, she simply disappeared behind her door, plotting, observing, waiting for the next opportunity. John glanced at the neighborhood, the quiet streets now buzzing with whispers about the incident. He knew this was only the beginning of a longer, more complicated battle. Karen had already proven she could escalate situations unpredictably. And he had learned something crucial: in this neighborhood, power wasn't about money, luxury, or even rules, it was about strategy, patience, and knowing when to act. That night, John reviewed his photos of the helicopter again. The damage still stung, but he realized something: Karen had underestimated him. She thought he would react with anger, maybe even retreat. But John had stayed calm, collected evidence, and involved the right people. And that, he knew, would make all the difference in the next phase of this neighborhood war. As the streetlights flickered on, John sensed movement across the road. Karen's silhouette appeared briefly behind her curtains. He couldn't see her face, but he felt her eyes on him, calculating, patient, and relentless. John smiled faintly, almost to himself. This isn't over, he whispered.
And he knew Karen would try again.
But next time, he would be ready, smarter, stronger, and armed with the law, witnesses, and determination. The neighborhood had returned to a fragile calm, but underneath, tension simmered. Karen had lost this battle, but the war was far from over.
And John?
He was only just beginning to fight back. The morning air was unusually still in the neighborhood.
John had hoped that after the HOA drama, things would settle down. Maybe Karen would finally realize her limits.
But deep inside, he knew better.
Karen didn't quit, she escalated.
It started with a sudden, loud banging on John's front door. He froze, heart racing. When he opened it, two uniformed police officers stood there, serious expressions on their faces.
"Mr. John," the taller officer asked. "We've received a complaint regarding property damage and harassment." John's stomach sank.
"Yes, officers.
But I'm the victim here.
My helicopter was damaged by my neighbor, Karen."
The officers nodded.
"We're here to hear both sides."
"Can we come in?" John stepped aside, trying to remain calm.
Inside, he carefully laid out his evidence, photos, videos, notes, and even the documentation he had sent to the HOA.
Every detail of Karen's harassment was recorded. Minutes later, the door opened again. Karen had arrived, looking deceptively calm.
But this time, her usual smugness had a nervous edge. She was accompanied by another officer, her claim, John had provoked her and that she was defending herself.
The room was tense.
Neighbors had gathered outside, curious eyes peeking through windows. Karen's words were sharp, carefully crafted, trying to twist the story in her favor. But the officers asked questions methodically, going through each piece of evidence, comparing statements, and observing her reactions. John could feel the weight of the moment. Karen was dangerous, unpredictable, and manipulative. One wrong move, and she could find a way to turn the situation against him. Then something surprising happened. A neighbor, Mr. Patel, who had remained silent during previous conflicts, stepped forward. "I saw Karen near the helicopter the day it was damaged.
I even took a short video on my phone."
He handed the officer the video. Karen's face paled slightly as the footage clearly showed her presence at the helicopter, handling tools near the rotors. For the first time, John noticed her confidence waver.
She tried to maintain control, but the evidence was undeniable.
The officers exchanged glances.
"This is serious," one said. "Deliberate property damage is a criminal offense. We may need to take further action depending on the HOA's input and any additional reports."
Karen's lips tightened, her hands trembling slightly. She had tried to manipulate the rules, twist the story, and intimidate John, but now the law was involved. For the first time, she felt real pressure. John realized something crucial in that moment: this wasn't just about winning an argument anymore. It was about proving the truth and protecting his property, not letting someone like Karen manipulate the system. After a tense hour of questions, discussions, and neighbor statements, the officers left, leaving Karen and John alone.
Karen's eyes burned with fury.
"You think this ends here?" she spat.
"The cops? They won't stop me. I'll find another way."
John stayed calm, though his hands were tight at his sides. "Karen," he said quietly, "I've already documented everything.
I'm not scared of your games. You've gone too far.
This ends now, legally, not with threats or destruction." She paused, as if calculating her next move. Then, slowly, she backed toward her house.
"This isn't over," she whispered, almost to herself. "I'll be back. You haven't seen the last of me." John exhaled slowly, knowing she meant it. Karen didn't just escalate, she planned to keep pushing boundaries, to test patience, to create chaos.
And the next phase of their conflict would not be small, it could involve more neighbors, legal battles, and perhaps even dangerous retaliation.
Later that evening, John walked toward the helicopter, inspecting the damage again.
He ran his fingers along the scratches and bent rotors, thinking about Karen's audacity. She had tried to intimidate him, manipulate witnesses, and even involve the police in a twisted narrative, yet she underestimated John's determination and preparation.
He knew one thing: Karen was clever, unpredictable, and relentless.
But John had evidence, witnesses, and a clear understanding of the law.
And that knowledge gave him an edge.
Outside, Karen's silhouette appeared briefly behind her window. Her eyes glinted with determination, almost like a predator plotting her next move. John met her gaze for a brief moment, a silent challenge passing between them.
The battle was no longer about a helicopter or HOA rules. It was about control, strategy, and who would break first.
John felt the adrenaline surge again. He had survived the first real storm, Karen's attempt to manipulate and intimidate, but he knew this was just the beginning. The calm of the neighborhood had shattered completely, and the tension was only growing. And in the quiet hum of the evening, with the helicopter standing scarred but defiant in the backyard, John realized something important. He had won a battle, yes, but Karen had already planned her next move. The real test of patience, strategy, and nerve was still ahead. This was no longer a neighborly disagreement. It had become a war, a dangerous game of wits between John and Karen, and neither side was willing to surrender. The neighborhood had regained a fragile calm, but John knew better than to relax. Karen's eyes, sharp and calculating, had not left his mind for a second.
After the police involvement, he thought she might back off. He was wrong. Karen had gone silent, but silence in her case always meant something more dangerous was brewing.
It started with small, subtle signs. First, John noticed his mail missing or shifted slightly. Then, small things in his yard were out of place, tools moved, garden lights tampered with, even the helipad markers were slightly scratched. Nothing major yet, but enough to let John know Karen was testing him again.
Then came the unexpected twist. One morning, a group of neighbors knocked on John's door.
They weren't there to complain, they were concerned. Apparently, Karen had started spreading rumors about him, that he was reckless, disrespectful, and even unsafe with his helicopter. Some neighbors were unsure what to believe, and John realized Karen was now trying to isolate him socially, not just physically.
John took a deep breath. He realized something crucial: Karen's strategy was evolving. She wasn't just angry, she was tactical.
She was combining harassment, rumors, and subtle intimidation to wear him down.
And if he didn't respond carefully, she could turn the entire neighborhood against him.
John decided to step up his strategy. He began documenting everything meticulously: photos, video footage, and even neighbor statements about Karen's behavior. He knew the key was not to react emotionally but to build an airtight case. But just when he thought he had the situation under control, something shocking happened. One evening, as John returned from checking the helicopter, he noticed a strange vehicle parked near his driveway. A van, unmarked, with tinted windows.
The driver seemed to be lingering, watching his property. John's heart raced. Was this Karen's doing? Was she trying to intimidate him further, or was someone else involved?
He didn't know, but instinct told him to stay alert. He quietly took photos of the van and noted the license plate.
This wasn't ordinary neighbor drama anymore, it was escalating into something potentially dangerous.
The next day, Karen appeared at the HOA office, claiming John had been harassing her and that she feared for her safety. Her words were smooth, convincing, and filled with subtle threats. But John was ready. He presented his evidence: the damaged helicopter, photographs of Karen's interference, neighbor testimonies, and even the van incident.
The HOA was stunned.
Karen had tried to manipulate the narrative again, but this time, John's preparation left no room for doubt. They decided to place Karen under stricter supervision, limiting her interactions with John and warning her of possible legal consequences.
Karen left the HOA office visibly frustrated, but John noticed the glint in her eyes. She was not defeated.
She was already plotting her next move. Later that evening, John was inspecting the helicopter when he noticed something subtle yet alarming. One of the rotor blades had an unusual scratch, almost like it had been deliberately weakened. He realized with a chill that Karen had found a way to escalate the situation even further, this time, risking actual physical damage. John knew he had to act fast. He reinforced the helicopter, set up cameras around the yard, and contacted additional neighbors for support. The battle was no longer just about confrontation, it had become a full-scale strategy game.
Every move Karen made could be monitored, every action documented, and every plan anticipated. But Karen wasn't predictable in a normal way, she thrived on chaos and surprise. And John realized the final showdown would come not through rules or patience alone, but through outsmarting her at her own game. That night, as the streetlights flickered, John sat in his living room, reviewing all his notes, videos, and photos. Karen had underestimated him once, but now he had learned her patterns, her psychology, and her boldness. He knew she would make her next move soon, and when she did, it would be bigger, bolder, and designed to shock him and the entire neighborhood. John looked out the window and saw Karen's silhouette behind the curtain. She wasn't moving much, just watching. But he could feel her presence like a predator circling, waiting for the perfect moment. He smiled faintly, knowing that he was ready. Karen had planned the next move, but John had anticipated it. The tension, the strategy, and the unpredictable twists had built to a boiling point. The next phase would decide who had the upper hand, the relentless neighbor, or the man who refused to be intimidated. The calm of the neighborhood had shattered completely. The helicopter, scarred but standing, symbolized the battlefield. And both John and Karen knew that the final act of this escalating drama was coming, a showdown that neither could avoid. This was no longer just a story about property or HOA rules. This was a war of wits, nerves, and patience. And the next move could change everything. The morning sun bathed the neighborhood in golden light, but John felt no peace. Karen's shadow still lingered over his property, and he knew today would be decisive. After weeks of harassment, helicopter damage, HOA drama, and police involvement, it all came down to one moment, a final showdown where strategy, patience, and nerves would determine who truly had control. John stepped onto his backyard helipad, carefully inspecting the helicopter. It was damaged, yes, but reinforced and under constant watch. Cameras captured every angle, and neighbors who had witnessed Karen's schemes were ready to support him. He felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm. He had prepared for every possible move Karen could make, except maybe the one she was planning now. Across the street, Karen appeared at her front gate. She was unusually quiet, her usual confidence replaced by a tense, calculating energy. Her eyes scanned the yard, lingering on John and the helicopter, as if measuring the battlefield. For a moment, the world seemed still. The air held a strange, electric tension, the calm before a storm. John and Karen stared at each other across the street, a silent challenge passing between them. Then, Karen made her move. She strutted toward the backyard, ignoring the HOA rules and the watchful eyes of neighbors. "You think you've won," she spat. "This neighborhood belongs to everyone, and I won't be pushed around." John stayed calm. "Karen, this ends today," he said firmly. "No more games. No more damage. We settle this now, with witnesses, the HOA, and the law on our side." Karen smirked but paused, sensing the cameras, the neighbors, and the legal support surrounding John. For the first time, her bravado faltered. She glanced at the helicopter, the damage, and the evidence John had meticulously collected. She realized she was cornered. "Maybe you're right," she muttered, almost to herself, "maybe I've underestimated him." John stepped forward, calmly presenting the evidence once again, the photos, videos, neighbor statements, and even Karen's previous threats. Every detail built a case too strong to ignore. The HOA representatives, who had gathered at the scene, nodded in agreement. Karen's schemes, once subtle and manipulative, were now clearly exposed. Then came the final twist. Karen attempted one last act of defiance. She lunged toward the helicopter, seemingly to damage it again. But John's preparations paid off. The cameras recorded every move, neighbors intervened quickly, and HOA security restrained her before she could cause harm. The police, already informed and on standby, arrived minutes later. Karen was escorted inside her house for questioning. Her smirk was gone, replaced with a look of disbelief and frustration. She had tried to manipulate everyone, escalate the conflict, and assert control, but John had outsmarted her at every step. Standing by his helicopter, John felt a mix of relief and triumph. The machine was scratched and bent, but it still stood strong, just like him.
He realized the battle wasn't just about property or HOA rules, it was about patience, strategy, and the courage to stand firm against someone relentless. Neighbors came forward, offering quiet congratulations. Some apologized for initially being unsure whom to believe, acknowledging John's patience and intelligence. Even HOA officials praised his careful documentation and calm approach. John took a deep breath, glancing across the street at Karen's house. She had learned her lesson the hard way: no amount of manipulation or intimidation could overpower evidence, witnesses, and determination. But the most important lesson wasn't just for Karen. John realized he had learned something too: patience and preparation often matter more than anger or impulsive reactions. Calm strategy could overcome chaos. Evidence, allies, and composure were stronger than intimidation. And most importantly, even in a neighborhood full of difficult people, one could protect what mattered without losing themselves in the process. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the quiet street, John climbed into his helicopter. The engine roared to life, a sound he had feared he might never hear again. He lifted off, soaring above the neighborhood, feeling freedom, relief, and victory all at once. Below him, Karen watched from her window, a mixture of frustration and grudging respect on her face. She had tried to control, dominate, and intimidate, but John had stood firm, prepared, and unshaken. The helicopter may have been scarred, the neighborhood tension high, and the conflict intense, but in the end, patience, preparation, and courage had won. John flew above the houses, over the trees, and toward the horizon. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely free. The battle was over, the lesson learned, and the neighborhood finally returned to calm. And somewhere in the distance, John smiled, knowing that while Karen might still lurk and scheme, she would never break his resolve again. This was more than a story about a helicopter. It was about standing your ground, outsmarting chaos, and proving that calm determination always prevails even against the most relentless neighbor.